Jih spustiš?
Okay.
Okay, we can start. Hello everybody, dobrodošli, welcome, dobri den.
Imamo mi kakšen zvočnik, ki dela?
Ja, tamle so zdaj smo kupile not.
Ok, mogoče slišim naš jezik, prosim vse udeležence, da izklopijo svoj mikrofon. Za trenutek še počakamo, da se vsi priklopite. We will wait a little bit more, 1 minute or two, before we start. I would kindly ask you to mute yourself, to switch off your microphones. Because we have a huge group. And just to make sure that everything goes smoothly, I would kindly ask you.
In ne, jaz ne slišim, mogoče ona meni.
Hvala, Petra.
Čisto tišina.
Just 1 more minute before we start. Can you all hear me? Okay. Just give me a hint that I know that.
Yes.
Thank you. Okay, we still have people to start, but okay. Okay, people will probably come also a little bit later, but I think it's time that we start. So as you can see, we wish everybody to have a welcome today with our international online conference. So hello, everybody. I would like to welcome you to the International Web Conference, the final part of the international project, Erasmus Plus project, which was entitled Enhancing Inclusive Education, Upskilling Teacher Assistants in Using Evidence-Based Practices. The project involved experts from 4 countries, Australia, Czech Republic, Serbia, and Slovenia, working in various institutions related to the education of persons with special needs, as well as training of staff such as special educators, teachers, teacher assistants, preschool teachers. So let me start by giving you some technical information. You can still see that people are coming to our conference, but firstly, we would like to present you our program, that you can organize your day, or even more precisely, your afternoon. So this slide shows the timetable for the event for all participants from different countries. So Australia, Serbia, Czech Republic, and Slovenia. The first part, so this part is the common part of the presentation, and we will all be listening to a presentation on evidence-based practice by Professor Iva Strnadová from University of South New Wales, Sydney. This part will run approximately at 2:15 p.m. until 3 p.m. or 3:15. So we will see, because we have 5 minutes delay. So there will be a short break after the common presentation for the 15 minutes, and you will then have the option to switch to another link, so national link, and you will be able to listen to the presentation in the language of your country. You have all got your national links to join to the second part of the conference, but we will also write the national links into the chat box just for sure. So no worries at all. You will have the national links also written in the chat box. Then you will be put into a waiting room the same way as for this part. And we would really kindly ask you that you turn your microphones off, and when the discussion starts, you will be able to talk. You can unmute yourself, and therefore we really kindly ask you for your patience. One more thing, we didn't plan the questions at the end of the common part from Professor Iva Strnadová, but you will have a chance to ask questions in the national part of the conference. So before we start with the formal presentation on EBP, I would also like to give a word to our project manager. This is Jitka Mošničková from Jahodovka, Czech Republic. So Jitka, the floor is yours now.
Yeah, thank you, Damjana, very much for a warm welcome. And I will share my presentation, which will be really short. Don't worry. Yeah. Just a second. Yes. Okay. So I hope you are all well seated and comfortable. We will start with a brief introduction of the project that actually enabled this conference to happen. So first, I want to point out that I very much appreciate that you found the time and joined this conference. Yeah, my name is Jitka Mošničková, and I am a manager of this project, which title you can read on the screen. It's quite long, but don't worry, you will know at the end of the conference, you will definitely know what is it about. Okay, so this project is aimed at teacher assistants and their educators, and we have developed for them the methodology guide, which will be presented later. As you can see, project has been running almost 1 year and a half. So this is the last event even. We had budget of 60,000 euro, which was granted by European Union from Erasmus Plus program, as Damjana already said. Yeah, and the main result, how it looks like. You can see we have developed methodology guide in English, in Czech, in Serbian, and also in Slovenian. So each nation has its language version. Now I am presenting the English one. You can see it's beautiful. We like it very much. Yeah, and who is responsible for this result? That's partners. As you can see, the leader of this project is Jahodovka Professional Institute from Czech Republic, and we have two partners: University of Ljubljana, Pedagogical Faculty from Slovenia, and Resource Center for Special Education from Serbia. I very much thank them because it was really hard work, and I think we should thank ourselves that we have done really good work, and I hope you will like it too. So this is it, and just a short presentation of project, as I said. And I am passing my word again to Damiana, and thank you very much.
Okay, thank you, Jitka. And now I welcome Professor Dr. Iva Strnadová from the University of New South Wales in Sydney, Australia, who has been responsible for this project and who will give us an overview what EBP, what evidence-based practice means, how it is applied in practice with children with special needs, and what evidence it is based on. And she will also present and show us how a methodology guide was created in different languages, which contains selected evidence-based practices, their application and implementation in the process of education and rehabilitation. The practices will be also discussed later on the national conference. I wish you all a pleasant day and really enjoy the presentation. And dear Professor Iva Strnadová, the floor is yours.
Thank you very much, Damiana, for such a wonderful introduction. And let me start by saying that I feel very honored that I can be presenting at this conference, and that the knowledge about evidence-based practices is finally getting to European countries. I think that's such an important achievement. I will begin with the way that is traditional in Australia, which will be probably new for everybody from all the three countries. But we always start any big presentation or conference by acknowledging the traditional owners of Australia, the Aboriginal and Torres Strait Islander people. And I especially acknowledge the traditional owners of the land where I am currently situated, Kameraiga people of Eora Nation, and I acknowledge that this land always has been and always will be theirs. So let me just present now our wonderful team that worked on this project and who developed the methodology guide. And it has been wonderful, absolutely wonderful year and a half of collaboration with just lovely people and very knowledgeable people. So just a big shout out to the whole team. So let's talk a bit about the context for why we're doing what we're doing. We all that we are here are very much invested and interested in supporting inclusive education of students who have disability. And we know that it can be sometimes a challenging task in the different contexts that we are situated in. But all our countries are actually the signatories of the United Nations Convention on the Rights of People with Disabilities, and specifically the Article 24.1 really points out the rights of students with disability to inclusive education. And to make the education inclusive, it is not only about a place. Just by placing students to mainstream school doesn't mean that they will be included and that their high quality education will be in the center of the attention. We need much more. The students have also right to educational adjustments if these are needed, or modifications. And part of these adjustments is also the use of evidence-based practices. What stands in the heart of inclusive education, and really of United Nations conventions, but many other international and national documents of this time, is person-centered planning and person-centered teaching. And so what we really want to always remember, that the student is in the center of what we do, and we are looking at targeted support in educational context. In order to look at what educational supports are available for students, our Australian team have done a very comprehensive review of current evidence regarding what are the most effective educational supports for students with disability. And I will just present it as a context to evidence-based practices. To really analyze well the relevant peer-reviewed and rigorous literature, we've used as a, and this is the only kind of really not very known term that I will throw at you, but we have used as our conceptual framework Bronfenbrenner's biological model. It's very often used in research, according to which the student or a child is in the center and is surrounded by different layers, nested layers of different systems that affect the child. And so the closest to the child would be actually the interactions that the child has with their parents, with teachers, with other peers, that have impact on the child's outcomes, on their well-being, or on how well they do in life. But also they are part of a bigger picture of interactions that they are not necessarily part of themselves. So, for example, the collaboration between parents and teachers, even though the child is not included, will have a great impact on how the child is doing or how the student is doing. So we borrowed that model and created framework for educational support. And so at the center, as you can see, is the student with disability. And the closest educational support that exists around the students are really those that are in the direct interaction that student has with teacher assistant, and other educational personnel. It can be special educator, school counselor, and these educational supports can be of different types. These can be adjustments, for example, enlarging font for a child that has visual impairment is a very typical example of adjustment, or giving extra time to a student with dyslexia to read or complete a written task would be another example. We also use, in this sense, differentiation, which means that the teachers always have in mind that students might prefer to display their knowledge or to learn in different ways. And so while some students will prefer to write an essay and show that they have learned, other students might want to make a little clip or video where they display their learning. So that's an example of differentiation, when you provide more possible supports or more possible ways students can learn, but also display their knowledge. And of course, in this kind of layer of educational supports are also beautifully situated evidence-based practices that we will be talking about today, such as video modeling or prompting, but there are many others. Then another layer of educational supports is, of course, the collaborative practice and planning. And that's where I talked about how interaction within the different education-related stakeholders is really important for students. For example, collaboration between teacher and teacher assistant is of critical importance. If the teacher and teacher assistant really work well together, plan together, reflect on the needs of child, they will be able to support the student much better than if there is really not much of a communication and mutual respect. And that, of course, applies again on interactions between the family and the school, and of course, other educational stakeholders. And so all of these are part of educational supports, though not necessarily the student is involved, but is very much affected by these. Another next bigger picture layer of the educational supports is teacher training and support. So in order to really deliver world-class education, high quality education, we also need to have well-educated teachers, well-educated teacher assistants. We need to have good laws, good education laws that support the students. And then the next level, moving to the layer 4 and educational supports in that space, are really the overarching values, beliefs, and attitudes that people have. And many times we see teachers who are really dedicated and who believe that their students have potential, big potential, and that they can achieve, and support them. And of course, if you have high expectations of your student, that is much more motivating than when when teachers have very minimal expectations and behave accordingly. So this will, again, though this will have a big impact on how we provide educational support. And the last layer here is really the support across the lifetime and during the different stages of education. And so if the student has received very poor educational support from the schooling environment, they will be entering the next stage of their schooling already with a great level of skepticism and maybe not really willing that much to collaborate with a teacher, with teacher aid, and so on. So this is just a bigger picture within which we are talking about evidence-based practices. And so to reiterate, the evidence-based practices are one of the possible educational supports that are located in the direct contact with the student. So what are evidence-based practices? And I'm very aware that in our context, being myself Czech, though living now for many years in Australia, but knowing from my Serbian and Slovenian colleagues, the evidence-based practices are actually quite a new concept that is coming to Europe. So what are the evidence-based practices? Those are really strategies or practices, interventions that have a solid research support. And there's also a hierarchy between these evidence-based practices, because some have more support to show that they support students' outcome than others. What is the minimum that we can, what is the real characteristics of evidence-based practices? Is that they are based on high quality research over a really solid range of different students in a range of places and over a range of behaviors. So what do we mean by that? If somebody publishes an article and they say they have done few interviews with students and teachers, and they published the article, and therefore the practice that they looked at is evidence-based, that is not the case. That is a wrong use of the term. But it's very striking how much people tend to think, and teachers, even in Australia as well, many teachers will think, okay, there was one article published, I can believe that this practice is evidence-based. So when I talk in the presentation, I'll give some examples, but also show you good places where you can go if you are unsure whether specific strategy, intervention, and so on is evidence-based practice. So and you don't have to do it. There are people who have done the homework for you, but it's really important to understand this concept. So whether the practice is evidence-based is usually determined by quantitative studies or single subject studies that measure students' outcomes. So you can't do that by qualitative research. When we say over a range of different students, we talk about 100 students from different countries from different levels of education, with different disabilities as well. And if we can show that the research conclusively says, yes, using, for example, visual supports that we will mention today, do help students on the autism spectrum or students with intellectual disability to achieve their educational, academic outcomes or achieve their social skills outcomes, and then we can believe that that's the case. So that's a really big, important condition. And there is, of course, such a terminology maze that you can probably hear around you. And again, it's good to have an idea how to navigate that space. Sometimes these terms are used synonymously with terms like best practice. And the best practice, I don't know how it is in all your contexts, but here best practice is such a buzzword that if schools or others want to sell some practice, they will say it's best practice, but it's really it's not based on any measures. Then there is the term research-based practices you might have seen, and there is actually a hierarchy. So research-based practices might have less evidence behind than evidence-based practices. So it's really good to be also mindful of the terms we hear about around us and be critical to them. So when we look at the evidence-based classifications, evidence-based practice, that's the very top. That's the practices that really have a very solid research background from different countries. Also importantly, I forgot to say, from different research teams. So it's not that one research team develops intervention and then they also do the research about it and they publish about it. Of course, it is biased. You have to have a different research teams looking at this. Then we have a potentially evidence-based practice that has some research background, but needs more evidence. And it doesn't mean that there is something wrong with the practice. It's just there might have been that not enough research teams have looked at it. So it's really important then to keep an eye. Sometimes it happens that specific practices can have mixed evidence. So some studies shown that they really work for students. Some studies said, well, they actually didn't work for this cohort of students. And then we have also practices that have insufficient evidence, or even we have evidence that they have negative influence on students. So this is just to kind of help us to navigate the maze of terminology that is around us. So importantly, I'll just move the slide. The big, I think, question in front of us is, as teachers, we often teach, and as teacherettes, there's no difference, the way we were taught and we have observed others teaching, and we don't even question the approaches. And even if we are not achieving any outcomes, or the students are not achieving any outcomes, we don't question whether it might be because we are not using appropriate educational support. we usually think about, okay, that's the student's problem, that maybe their disability is such that they can't achieve, or maybe they don't have a right attitude to education. So it's really important that we give the best chances to our students, and part of it is really think about, is what I'm doing working? Do I need to change something in my teaching practice? And a really important part of this thinking through for us as teachers is always making sure that we take data. So if I use specific approach, intervention, strategy with the student, I also need to track how they are. Is what I'm doing helping them to improve their reading score, or their specific skills in mathematics? And we can't build this only on impression. Our memory can be fading, sometimes the student does better, sometimes worse. We need to have a real measurement that we note down and compare the student's results. And if even after one term or two, the student is not really improving in the area of the skill, then we really need to consider, okay, what's some other practice that we could use and implement. So we have developed here a little, I don't know how you would say it in English, scenarios, maybe, I don't know, about, how also when you want to build a bridge, you don't build just on the impressions, but you actually need to sit down, measure properly, and do the work based on evidence, not based on just feelings or what I might think can be right. Now, I know this looks really big and I will zoom in. This is just example for you how many evidence practices there are. And I will give you links during the presentation. You don't need to take notes or anything. You will have all these practices at your fingertips, as the thing in English goes. But you can see that many of these practices you probably are already doing in the school, such as direct instruction, using augmentative and alternative communication. Many of you do with your students, doing functional behavior assessment. I'm pretty sure that would be quite common across the countries. Some using task analysis, using technology aided instruction. So for example, specific apps on iPad or other tablets that can help students to develop their speech or their social skills, interactions, and so on. Sometimes though, there might be evidence-based practices that are not yet that known in Czech Republic. And again, you will receive resources from us where you can find these. These are more available in English. So going back to the big review that I've mentioned at the beginning of the presentation, when we have reviewed the international literature, and you can get a summary of that massive review here if you scan the QR code. But we found that there are in international literature 44 evidence-based practices that can be used in the that are very well grounded in research and can be easily used with students with disability to achieve different outcomes. And so we've grouped many of these evidence-based practices into the basic bigger groups, and these are really the most common evidence-based practices that are used with students with disability. So one of them, visual and video support, and we will go into much more detail about this evidence-based practice in the national part of the conference, that we will explain what these exactly mean. Peer-mediated instruction. And again, this is not just that I say to little Johnny, sit next to Peter and study together. That's not peer-mediated instruction. You really there are really rigorous steps how you apply the peer-mediated instruction to be actually effective. There are rules for these evidence-based practices for all of them. Systematic instruction is again something that many of you do in the classes, but might not know all the steps or how this evidence-based practice should be actually implemented. Another example is self-management, how to really empower and teach the students how to moderate their own behavior, or how to learn skills, how to change habits, and this is something that that again has many different approaches, and of course prompting and time delay. What was interesting looking at the international literature and all the evidence that we have is also how much the researchers pay attention to the like a type of disability the students have. And so probably not surprisingly, but still interestingly, in international literature, most students that were targeted with evidence-based practices are students with intellectual disability and on the autism spectrum. Now, there is, of course, a lot of sufficient evidence that many of these evidence-based practices work for other students too, or other groups of students, but these are the most kind of studied or targeted groups of students. So this is just showing how the proportion of the focus. And then what was really interesting also was you can use visuals, for example, supports, such as using pictograms, using visual timetables, etc., for development of various outcomes. You can use it for development of academic outcomes, be it, learning to read, write, improving in biology. We can use it for social and emotional outcomes. So you can use the visual supports to maybe improve the skills that are needed for making friends and maintaining friends, as an example, but also for self-determination outcomes. So you can use the visual supports to teach the students how to make decisions, how to make choices, how to solve problems, how to speak up for themselves and advocate. Those are really important skills. And so you can see that mostly it's probably the nature of education that really most of the researchers and research teams focus on academic outcomes, followed by social outcomes, and not many on self-determination outcomes. So you can see that visual supports and prompting work across all three outcomes of students. So again, when you do your researches, when you do your, as an educator, when you're thinking, okay, my student really needs to, I need to support them to develop social skills so that they can interact with the peers in the classroom, then I always need to look whether the evidence-based practice that I've selected would work also for that area of outcomes. So it's an important thing to think about. So where you can find what actually the evidence-based practices. One of the fantastic resources is Affirm. And we have used a lot of Affirm resources when we were developing our methodology guide, of course, with the approval of the Affirm, who also will receive all our final guides, and they are very much acknowledged throughout. Affirm these have been resources and modules developed for specifically to support students on the autism spectrum. But when you can, They have amazing resources and you can use them free of charge. The only thing is that you need to create an account and register, but you don't pay anything. Don't be worried about that. I know sometimes people are worried that it might come later. And then you can explore them at your own leisure. They cover most of the evidence-based practices I've showed you, and we know from research that these practices work for other groups of students as well. So it's a really fantastic resource. It has different checklists, what you need to prepare as a teacher or teacher aid. It has modules that give you example of worksheets that you can use with the students. You would have to, of course, translate into depth, but it's absolutely amazing resource, and I send there all my bachelor's and master's students for learning. Another fantastic resource is What Works Clearinghouse. That's based, both Affirm and What Works Clearinghouse are based in America, and really a lot of research into evidence-based practices comes from United States, from Britain, from Australia, but sadly not from many other countries, which I think it's such a pity. And maybe we can make a difference also after getting acquainted more with the practices and using them. So this is What Works Clearinghouse is focused on any child with disability. You can find the practices according to area of school of subject, so mathematics, English, biology, or you can also look across the area of where the student is being educated. Is a primary school student? Does this work for high school students, etc.? So it's a really very useful resource. And then this is also very good resource. It's a different clearinghouse, but called the same National Clearinghouse on Autism Evidence and Practice. And they have, again, fantastic resources that you can see that they also link to Affirm that I've mentioned at the beginning, but they really bring some great knowledge in this area. And I need to reinforce, we are not talking only about autism. It is just because it's such a actually overstudied population in research that a lot of places where you can go and learn about evidence-based practices often focused mainly on students on the spectrum, but I've shown you even some that don't. Now, this brings me to the next important part, and that is, it's all well and good if I select an evidence-based practice, but don't follow the implementation steps. And so I have seen so many times that teacher would select evidence-based practice and then they would freestyle. They would think, I might change this aspect, and that's why we made these comics, because I think that nicely develops it from, can you give me the recipe, but then I don't have this ingredients or that ingredients, and ends up in disaster because actually they don't follow the recipe. And it's a beautiful parallel to using evidence-based practices. It's not enough just that somebody says to you as a professional, use visual support. How do I make the decision? How do I select the visual support that will suit the student I'm supporting? How do I engage the student themselves? How do I then use it in what intervals, for example? How do I record whether the student is reaching their aims or the outcomes that are intended? So it's the fidelity of implementation. I cannot understate how or overstate how important this is. If I select the practice, I need to learn about how to use it. I need to follow the steps, and I need to collect the data to see whether it's working for the student. Then I need to sit down after maybe one term, might need to meet 2 terms. If the evidence-based practice I'm using works and the student is improving, great, I can continue using it. I can maybe use it also for another outcome I want to achieve with the student. If the evidence-based practice doesn't work, and I have been collecting data and doesn't seem to work, it doesn't mean that it's the fault of evidence-based practice, or that it's fault of the student, or if you implemented it as per directions, that it's your fault. The fact that the intervention or strategy is evidence-based doesn't mean it will work for everybody. And I think that goes to the heart of what we, I think, all can agree here, that there is not such a thing as one size fits all. And so that's why it's important to have also the knowledge of the wide range of evidence-based practices. Because if I know that in order to achieve the social skill I want my student to learn, I can actually choose between visual supports, I can use video modeling, I can use social skills training, and I can use prompting, I can use reinforcement, and suddenly I have a whole range of practices that I can select. And so if one of them doesn't work for whatever reason with the student, not a tragedy. I just look at the list and select another one. So that's really important that we don't blame ourselves. It's we are, as I said at the beginning, at the heart of inclusive education is that person-centered or student-centered approach. And so we, of course, need to find what works for the student. I've already shown that. And of course, making that decision, like what will work for the student or not, is there are many things in play. Some students' characteristics for sure. I will be selecting a respective evidence-based practice based on what is the age of the student, and then I can look up whether it has been verified for that age, their learning needs. Also culture. Some evidence-based practices might be less culturally appropriate for some students than others. Another thing is, of course, taking into consideration the environmental characteristic. So if I know I am teaching in mainstream classroom, I have 30 students, these are the resources I have. What is realistic evidence-based practice I can actually implement? Because some evidence-based practices are more time and resources demanding than others. And then last but definitely not the least is also instructors or teachers, teacher aides, whoever is using the practices, characteristics. So your knowledge, your experience, if you are beginning teacher, or beginning teacher aide, then it would be probably wise to also look at evidence-based practices that don't have too many implementation steps and are not too complicated. You might start with something at that stage and then maybe look for more elaborate evidence-based practices. It depends on teaching philosophy. And so you might feel uncomfortable with some of the practices that are used. And our students might be uncomfortable. One very typical example of this is actually applied behavior analysis. So I know that it is used in different countries. I think ABA or applied behavior analysis will be known to you, and it's particularly, not only, but particularly used with students on the autism spectrum. And it's a very intensive intervention, needs education, the side of a person who applies it. And it has been actually really heavily criticized in the international forum, on different Facebook groups and social media groups of autistic people, who are now adults and who used ABA or were exposed to ABA as children and now say it was horrible, I have post-traumatic stress disorder, it's an awful practice. And not everybody who went through would say that, but you can see that sometimes evidence-based practice can have a lot of support, but might not be acceptable to people. And so it's always important to ask. So I would always start with the student and explore whether, visual support would be something that we can try. And if it worked with my students, awesome. If it's something that they really don't like to use, we can look at something else. So really involve and put at the center your student. And in the guide that we will introduce to you, we also talk a lot and give you a lot of example of how do you actually go about implementing the evidence-based practices. And it's the really 6-step process of first identifying the skill or the behavior. So I need to know what I am addressing and I need to be specific. It's not enough just my students Johnny has disturbing behaviors. That's such a vague term. How am I going to find evidence-based practice if I can't even define what is it exactly that I'm looking at with Johnny, or you can change the name. Then it's investigating evidence-based practices, and so you will have, as a result of this project, our guide where we discuss some of them, but we also are giving you many resources in English where you can explore in much deeper on a much deeper level. Then, of course, making the selection based on the things we have been talking about on the previous slide. So there are different things that we need to take into consideration. You need to well prepare, make sure that you have the knowledge, you know the steps, you have the resources that are needed. And then, of course, it's the implementation and very important monitoring implementation. So what will be the method that I use to track the data, and what will be most efficient method? Teachers, teacher aides are exhausted, are very busy. And so adding some complicated methods for collecting data, whether the method works, that will not be sustainable. So it's also thinking about effective yet very solid methods how to do this. And that's really the really big message, that the effective intervention and effective implementation where we are really grounded in fidelity of the implementation as well, leads then to students' improved outcomes. So in our methodology guide that we have created for you, we have focused on 6 evidence-based practices. These were selected very much based on our knowledge of the 3 countries, Serbia, Slovenia, and Czech Republic. And we knew that some of the wider evidence-based practices, as I told you, the 44 evidence-based practices identified in international rigorous literature, some of them are not really known in different in Czech Republic or in Slovenia and Serbia. So we thought we will start with the guide that will focus on those methods that you probably have heard of, might use, but maybe are not using fully the way they were intended, because the training about how to use this method is still missing. And so we focus on social narratives. You may also know this evidence-based practice as social stories. We have focused on visual supports, technology-aided instruction, prompting, reinforcement, and task analysis. And in the following section, in the national section, you will hear in much more detail information about these 6 evidence-based practices. So you have a lot to work forward to, and also a big shout out to and I hope I don't butcher his name, Jakub Dušek, who has created these wonderful pictures that are original, as well as the puzzle of the implementation steps. So this is just a little peek into the evidence-based methodology guide that we created for you, where in the first part we take you in great detail through every phase that is mentioned here. So here, for example, when we are thinking about what is the learning outcome we want to see and what is the goal for my student, we use SMART goals, and this is chronically known across, I think globally really, that very often teachers struggle with creating SMART goal that is specific, that is measurable, that is achievable, that is relevant to the student, and that is time-bound. And so this is something we rather tend to have a very vague goals for students, such as Johnny will improve in reading. Well, how do I know? What does it mean he will improve? What is the measurement? How can I measure? How can I see that he will improve? What will it look like that he improved? What is the time frame I'm measuring this? Is the goal really achievable? So, and is it relevant to Johnny? So is it priority for him and his family? So that's why you can see that involving the student and their family is absolutely critical. And in the second part of our guide, we will then present the selected 6 evidence-based practices, but we will walk you, we will say not only what they are, and for example, here you have the for what age groups they were confirmed by research and for what areas of outcomes they have been proved by rigorous research. But it also we also walk you through all the 6 steps of implementing the evidence-based practice for that specific evidence-based practice, and then we always have a case study that shows how you would work with it with a specific student in mind. So that is it from me as for this main presentation. I thank you very much for your attention. I know there's a lot of new things that we are discussing that are not part of traditional teacher preparation in either of the 3 countries, and so I hope that this will intrigue you and make you want to learn more and find much better tools and many more tools how we can support our students. And if I can say one more thing before I finish, is that the aim of the evidence-based practices is not to change the student. We are not trying to change the student. Our students, or the students with disability, are wonderful as they are. The evidence-based practices are tools when we help them or encourage them, show them how they can achieve learning outcomes. I think that's a really important and different mentality than having the idea that I will fix the student. There's nothing broken about the student. They just need educational support to achieve specific outcomes. So thank you so much for having me, and thank you for your attention, and I'll pass over to Damiana.
Thank you. The first part is come to the end. Thank you one more time, Professor Iva Strnadová. Like I said, we are sorry that we do not have much more time for questions in this part, but for sure it is planned in national part. So, but I will give a chance to Professor Iva Strnadová, maybe just to go through the chat comments And if she is willing, I would kindly ask her to give the reply to those who commented her presentation.
Definitely. I will very respectfully disagree with Jiří Kantor and what he writes about the evidence-based practices. There is definitely threshold. They are actually very, very comprehensive scales, and they are not artificially based. So I don't know where that is coming from. Happy to send you relevant literature and most current research. So you can read for yourself that I'm not making that up. And it is definitely, and then what is the second thing that should be used on the level of any national policy? On the contrary, the evidence-based practices are actually highly promoted in the countries I have mentioned. Departments of education are creating training and resources for teachers to use them so that the education of students is improved. I get from your comment you will disagree, and that's fine. And again, I offer to send relevant literature that you can follow. Thank you.
Thank you so much, Professor Strnadová. We will have 15 minutes break, and you are kindly asked to join the national part of the conference, and we will start at 3:20 p.m. So 20 minutes past 3, we will start with the national part of the conference. We have also wrote the national links to chat box, just for sure you have it again. And regards till the second part. Thank you for Okay, I think everything is being written in the chat, so we should switch on the national part. Maybe Iva, Jitka, and our team, if you have a minute or two, we can wait.
Damiana, could you just write in the chat box the sentence that this part is over, just this one,
Yes.
and the national part starts at 3:20 p.m. So everyone who is staying still here, very much thank you for your participating, and please find in the chat the proper link for your national part. And you will leave this space and enter the another. Yeah. Okay, Damiana, you can stop recording right now. It's like okay for now, I believe.